Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, November 8th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And Matt's successor as editor of the Washington Free Beacon and co-host of the Ink-Stained Wretches podcast, our friend Eliana Johnson joining us today. Hi, Eliana.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure. Well, it's a grim morning. It was a grim night last night. News out of Amsterdam of a pogrom. There is no other way to put it. Pre-positioned mobs of Muslim youths in Amsterdam following a soccer match between the Tel Aviv Maccabi team and a team in Amsterdam, at the conclusion of which, Tel Aviv having won, by the way, 5-0, these pre-positioned mobs attacked Israeli fans coming out of the stadium. The footage is horrifying. You can go to X or to wherever you get your social media GoPro feeds of Muslim terrorists assaulting Jews. They're all there. 30 or 40 injuries. It took the police in Amsterdam 5 hours to quell the incident. People being chased into restaurants, into hotels, being beaten on the street. 3 people are still missing. Israel scrambled 2 planes to send them to Amsterdam to help extract Israelis from this situation. If it just so happens that the 86th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the effective beginning of the final solution, takes place over the next couple of days. And if you want to get a sense of what Kristallnacht might have been like, because there's very little live active film footage of Kristallnacht, there are a lot of photos of broken windows and broken glass. You might get them from these GoPro videos of Jews being chased down in the streets of Europe. One particularly horrifying one of a father shielding his son, saying, take my money," in English, because he was trying to figure out how to communicate. Can't really see it, but you don't want to see it.
No.
And
couple things leap out. First, it looks like this was pre-planned, coordinated. This was a soccer match. The pogrom people seem to have known what they were doing.
They knew where the Israelis were staying.
Exactly.
They were also positioned outside specific hotels that must have, been booked
with that type of planning. You never can rule out foreign involvement, and I wonder whether the long arm of Iran is involved. Second is the location, the Netherlands, the capital of liberal cosmopolitan Europe, Spinoza's home, and here in this place as supposed tolerance and progressivism, of course, we have the worst and oldest hatred rearing its head, and it's just shameful for Europe.
As commentary contributor and my old colleague Eugene Kontorovich reminded us last night on Twitter, the Netherlands is also the home to The Hague, and what is going on in The Hague are prosecutions of Israel and Israeli officials for supposed war crimes. Maybe The Hague should itself be prosecuted for war crimes. Or the police in Amsterdam should be prosecuted for their inability to quell this event, whether we'll know over the next couple of days. There is, of course, an active and very serious anti-Semitism cohort in the Netherlands, led by Geert Wilders, that is not going to be silent about what went on here and is going to demand answers. But remember, this is the country from which Ayaan Hirsi Ali had to flee in fear of her life for raising questions about the effect of Muslim immigration on this wonderfully liberal, tolerant society that was, in her view, maybe destroying itself from within. That was 20 years ago that Ayan left the country to which she had fled from Somalia to flee the oppression that she had faced as a girl there, and here we are now.
Well, and that was the third aspect I wanted to highlight: the connection between immigration, terrorism, anti-Semitism. This is something that Europe has been struggling with for most of the 21st century. We're beginning to see parts of it emerge in the United States as well. And it is the ultimate driver, I believe, of national populism in Western Europe and the United States.
We should quickly talk about what you mean when you say we're beginning to see it here in the United States. So all week, by the way, things have been happening in the United States all week in parallel to what happened in Amsterdam. On Monday morning in Brooklyn, in Borough Park, a little boy riding his bike on the way to school, visibly Orthodox, was slapped off his bicycle by a man who said something anti-Semitic. Harvard and Yale have had incidents over the last 4 or 5 days. Elie Wiesel's grandson was sort of like literally his pathway was blocked on the Yale campus by some encampment members. There was a scene inside a library at Harvard where people started shouting about, genocide and the Intifada. At the University of California at Santa Cruz, a critical studies department invited people to join the Students for Justice in Palestine, an official concentration at the University of California State School at Santa Cruz, with a photograph, with an image of someone in a keffiyeh holding a gun and saying, please join. And then, of course, this is the major one 2 weeks ago in Chicago. In Chicago, at DePaul University, an Israeli reservist and another kid, an Israeli reservist who was a student at DePaul, wearing a shirt that said, like, I'm an Israeli reservist, ask me anything. And his friend were shoved to the ground and beaten in front of the student center at DePaul University a week after, the same day that there was a scene inside a synagogue in the Loop in Chicago where an Arab-Israeli coexistentist was speaking, and people came in and refused to leave and threw themselves on the floor and had to be dragged out. That's a week or 2 weeks after an illegal immigrant from Mauritania coming through the border at San Diego last year ends up on a street in West Rogers Park, Chicago, and shoots an Orthodox shulgoer on Shabbat morning, shouting Allahu Akbar, before he is subdued hours later by the Chicago police. A fact that it took the mayor of Chicago 4 days officially to acknowledge in a statement in which he used neither the word Jew nor the word anti-Semitism. So while we are looking at an actual pogrom in Amsterdam, we are looking at it's not over.
Last night, while this was going on, while we were watching videos of this in Amsterdam, there's a very large protest block marching on a private home of a Jewish family in Bergenfield, New Jersey, which is near Teaneck and that area, not far from Englewood. The family was apparently having an informal discussion, just a few people, about moving to Israel or how to do that, how to buy land in Israel or something. That it was not, from what I understand, an official real estate event or something of the kind that was attacked in Los Angeles a few months ago. These were just private people. and you are in Bergenfield, you are required to have permit to do any sort of public protest. And again, this was in a residential neighborhood outside someone's house, and they gathered, and the cops let them do it. And there was a counter protest. People in the neighborhood, because it's a Jewish neighborhood, came out of their homes and did a sort of counter protest standing in front of the home, and they passed around cholent and things like that. There was a nice sort of communal reaction to it. But what you had was a group of, one of the pictures that came out of Bergenfield last night was of a woman holding a Palestinian flag in one hand and a picture of Hitler in the other hand, and smirking at the camera that was taking the picture. I was in New Jersey last night.
I actually had a weird situation where I go to bed early and my Twitter account was hacked. So my learning about this event was waking up early this morning and just reading the newspapers. And I have to say, reading the New York Times' account, which I have up on my screen right now, about what happened, it's really difficult actually to understand what happened from reading the New York Times' account of what happened, where they describe bursts of violence tied to a soccer game. This is in the first paragraph of the piece, between a Dutch and Israeli team. And they say that Dutch police did not say what had touched off the violence. The exact circumstances remain unclear. Some of the violence was in support of the Israeli teams. Others were in protest. There was a tense atmosphere. But in reading the news accounts, the Wall Street Journal's is a little bit better. There seems to be a real reluctance, and John, your mention of Chicago and the way the authorities handled that there, to call this what it is, which is it appears to be a well-coordinated anti-Semitic attack. And what's so interesting to me about the Times and the Journal being so careful to call this by its name is that in our domestic politics, we've been inundated with cries from journalists that you can't say Trump misled somebody. You have to call it a lie. But with regard to anti-Semitic hate crimes against Jews, there's a real reluctance to acknowledge what it is.
Okay, this
is, and you can't say racially charged. You have to say racist. Yeah,
exactly.
But you can say linked to anti-Semitic, whatever.
Okay, so this is the complication that it's going to have to get sorted through over the next 48 hours. Early reports suggested that there was some kind of a kerfuffle between Israeli fans of the Maccabee team and Palestinian supporters of Palestine. This was all adduced from the claim or a video of somebody pulling down a Palestinian flag somewhere in Amsterdam. Then there was footage, again, GoPro footage, or totally out of context, of police in Amsterdam taking some Israelis wearing Maccabee shirts somewhere. So a narrative was created almost instantly that the Maccabee fans had pulled down a Palestinian flag, had then engaged in soccer hooliganism of some sort, had been taken into custody by police in Amsterdam, and that's what started this event. That narrative, I believe, we can now think was part of the overall psyop here. I don't know that. I can't attest to that. But the fact that it is now apparently unquestionable, based on what the police in Amsterdam and others are saying, that the decision to attack Israeli fans of the Maccabee team was pre-planned and organized and geographically sophisticated, so that it took place at different spots all over this neighborhood, including near the hotels at which is that where Israeli tours had booked blocks of rooms so that they could stay to watch the game.
They knew where the police escorts would end. Police escorted fans out of the stadium to various subway stops. And in some cases, maybe were stationed at some subway stops and escorted them through out of the exits of those places, depending on the neighborhood. They knew where the police stopped and the fans would pick up on their own. And then, of course, the police there with their hands in their pockets.
And remember that the Israelis who were there as fans, a lot of them are themselves, as people have been talking about, are war veterans, and for all we know have been in Gaza, but are trained. They're trained in self-defense. And so this idea that somehow they may have just attacked, and torn down, it beggars belief to think that a visitor to a city as a tourist is going to go around vandalizing stuff. People watch soccer games and get drunk, are often really bad, engaged in really bad behavior. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's actually, related to a point I want to bring up. This is precisely what globalize the Intifada means. And when it goes into action, particularly in Europe, this is what it looks like without the cosplay element in it. This is the actual hardcore people globalizing the Intifada. And the thing about international soccer culture, and I'm thankful that we're not steeped in it here, is that it is where all our civilizational clashes and pathologies play out, and they have for a long time. It's been a very racist, anti-Semitic undertaking for a long, long time, and it's not surprising at all that this is the kind of mass event that would trigger this. And we've been very close to things like this on the U.S. Excuse me, in the U.S. on campuses here. We're only a few clicks away from something like this having happened.
Well, we're clicks away because the mayor of Chicago has not used the word anti-Semitism. He has not responded to the event at a synagogue in the Loop or on a college campus within the boundaries of the city of Chicago. He has decided that this is not his field. Attacks on minorities in the city that are not attacks on black people don't count to Brandon Johnson. And we don't know. My other favorite event of the week, not to blend things in, is the DA of Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, making a very stern statement. This is not about anti-Semitism stuff, right? Making a very stern statement warning people that if they were to attempt in Philadelphia to interfere or disrupt or do anything to make the election on Tuesday any more problematic or interfere with the voting or something like that, he had handcuffs, he had jail cells, he had solitary confinement. He said FAFO. If you know what that means, you can look it up. This is a guy who will not prosecute anyone for anything except for the crime that he himself doesn't like. That's the classic rule of thumb. So what would happen if there's a pogrom in Philadelphia? Do we have any assurance whatsoever that the DA in Philadelphia will prosecute anybody for a misdemeanor offense relating to that?
That's the last point I want to make, is that when something like this happens, it opens up a window of possibility for it happening again and in other places, namely here. It becomes that much more thinkable.
As we discussed, a lot of the charges were generally dismissed in New York, right? When students at Columbia, excuse me, when students at Columbia and was it CUNY, the other school, or was it the City College?
Yeah, no, City College.
City College had all those charges were dropped, and at Columbia, that was the night that students took a janitor hostage temporarily in a building they had no right to be in. And those charges were dropped. And we all said, this is what you're incentivizing. The other thing is, just to raise about Chicago, is that immediately preceding what you described, John, in Chicago was the situation where the school, the Board of Education president in Chicago, now former Board of Education president Mitchell Johnson, had made these insanely anti-Semitic comments over the course of the year since October 7th. Some of them were, justifying the attack. Some of them were talking about Jews, feeling their power and all this other stuff. And the initial response from the city was, well, we all say things that we don't mean sometimes on social media. Let's see I want to see the full, context of this. And it just reminded me of like the last time we had this context debate was the same sort of thing, right? People yelling about killing Jews. Like that's the one time that we have this context where the mayor of one of the biggest cities in America will say, let's hang on. Let's get the full context of what he meant when he said the Jews are feeling their power, or something like that, as if it could be nuanced.
Right. Well,
anyway, that was immediately before he had a chance. In other words, the mayor had already had just failed badly an anti-Semitism test. And then he had this in which he failed in exactly the same.
I mean, that's the question is, did he fail an anti-Semitism test or did he pick Johnson because Johnson was an anti-Semite? That Johnson is somebody who has a compendium of beliefs in which anti-Semitism is a entirely functional subset of his other ideas, which is why Johnson wanted him in the first place. So it took him 7 days to realize that he really could not have him serve as head of the Board of Ed, because this was, like JD, the governor of the state of Illinois, is a repulsive guy, but he's a Jewish guy, was going to do something about it. Yeah. And so he needed to do something first. I mean, so like...
Can I just make two more observations about Europe? First is the radicals who believe in the settler colonialist ideology are often heard in pro-Hamas protests to tell the Jews of Israel, go back to Europe. Right. Well, here you have Israelis in Europe, and what happens? They're violently attacked in an organized manner, reinforcing the idea that for the state of Israel, for the Jewish homeland as the safe haven for the Jewish people, because outside of its borders, you cannot guarantee that Jews will be protected against anti-Semitic violence. That's number one.
There are two major, it's also important to mention this. Amsterdam has two major tourist sites. One of them is the Rembrandt Museum, and the other is the Anne Frank House. These are the two most visited sites in Holland, in Amsterdam. The Anne Frank House, where she was hidden and then betrayed, sent to Auschwitz and died of typhus, and the Rembrandt Museum. Rembrandt, of course, the painter whose work, as our dear columnist Sully Soloveitchik is very fond of pointing out, is among the most sort of philosophically, emotionally Zionist pieces of art ever produced. Amsterdam has a beautiful Holocaust memorial and a Holocaust museum and the Anne Frank House, and no Jew is safe in Amsterdam now. So it's wonderful that they commemorate and memorialize the events that were so awful and make sure that we never forget them. And now we're never going to forget them because you can't go to Amsterdam to go to the Anne Frank House safely, as literally happened to my friend's daughter. I have a friend's friend, her daughter, who was in class with my daughter, was in Amsterdam going to the game on her semester abroad, came up from a different European city, showed up, actually left the stadium early because some of her friends' tickets malfunctioned, couldn't get into the stadium, ended up in a bar. They had to close. The waiter in the bar had to put a crowbar across the bar's door entryway in order to prevent mobs from coming into the bar. And when it was all over and everything was there, my friend's daughter texted her and said, so do you think I can go to the Anne Frank house today or not? And her mother said, of course you can't go to the Anne Frank house today. We have to get you out of there as soon as possible. Stay in your room. So the Anne Frank house is now off limits to Jews who want to protect themselves against the Muslim horde in Amsterdam that drove Ayaan Hirsi Ali into exile from this country where she had gotten her PhD and was teaching and was a legislator and all of that 20 years ago.
So that leads to my second point, which is Europe is in a really bad way. Just take a step back and look. The divergence between America's economic growth and Europe's over the past decade, especially since the pandemic, is incredible. Everyone I know who has visited Europe, especially the United Kingdom, in recent past year or so, has said, you can just tell they're poorer than us, right? So you have economic decline. You have a group of countries that are still unserious about their national defense. The frontline Eastern European countries, of course, much more invested in their defense, worried about Europe. But the farther you get from the Russian frontier, the less serious Europeans are about defending themselves from external threats. They're poorer, and they have not grappled with the extent of the crisis that has come from immigration. And this is very disturbing. And I also think, though, it's another reason that in a Trump administration, Europe will be de-emphasized. And all of the John Kerry type multilateral meetings, let me speak French with my counterpart, and then go and dine at a wonderful restaurant in Paris, that's going to be over. And you can see the fear from someone like the UK's Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, total progressive shill, now trying to walk back all of the ridiculous and offensive things he said about Donald Trump over the years. He recognizes that Europe's in a bad place, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon.
Okay, so let's shift gears to Donald Trump and the continuing fallout from the election.
Well, can I just say one more thing on this before we move topics?
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring up that in 2015 there was this Paris supermarket hostage taking and killing of 4 hostages, injuring of a bunch of others. After that was after the Charlie Hebdo shooting. The kosher supermarket attack was on behalf of the Charlie Hebdo shooters. If you remember, the people who took it hostage and killed those Jews inside the supermarket had said, we're doing this for the martyrs, the heroes who had shot up Charlie Hebdo. After that, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went to Paris and he visited the site and he visited a synagogue. And he said in his speech, at the end of his speech, brothers and sisters, Jews of France, I would like to say to you what I say to our Jewish brothers and sisters from all countries. You have the full right to live in safety and tranquility as citizens with equal rights wherever you wish, including here in France. But Jews of our time have been blessed with another right, a right that did not exist for previous generations of Jews, the right to join their Jewish brothers and sisters in our historic homeland, the land of Israel, the right to live in our free country, the one and only Jewish state, the state of Israel, the right to stand tall and proud at the walls of Zion, our eternal capital of Jerusalem. Any Jew who wishes to immigrate to Israel will be welcomed with open arms and warm and accepting hearts. They will not arrive in a foreign land, but rather the land of our forefathers. For this speech, Netanyahu was subject to days of bad press in Israel, in the United States, and especially in Europe, where it was seen as obnoxious. It was seen as undiplomatic. It was seen as aggressive. It was seen as ungrateful for the fact that, well, France had, they condemned the attacks. They're against killing Jews. They said it was bad. And everybody said, this is what you shouldn't do. You can't go to these places and say you have a home in Israel. But that's exactly what has to be said over and over again, because the whole point is that the incentive structure, as we've said before, is officials don't do anything, cops stand by, DAs don't prosecute, etc. The only thing that can possibly move these people is the prime minister of the state of Israel coming to your city and saying, you messed up, you need to fix this, or they should leave.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because this just allows us to put a cherry on top of Matt's wonderful image of John Kerry going and speaking French and dining at a wonderful French restaurant. Because guess who didn't call the attack on Hyper Kasher, the supermarket that was attacked by these goons? Guess who didn't call it an anti-Semitic act? Obama Secretary of State John Kerry, who refused to characterize it as such for fear of being too incendiary. And I don't think that Donald Trump's election in 2016 had anything to do with any of this whatsoever. But what it did have to do with was the worldview that led John Kerry to think that it was provocative to call an anti-Semitic slaughter in Paris by its name. And that this, vulgar real estate guy from New York who was so rude and gross and insulting and personal was nonetheless not a guy whom you could imagine wouldn't say they went and killed Jews and somebody should go kill them back. So that's a way we could transition to talking about day 3 of Trump 2. And Eliana, you're the Free Beacon, which Matt founded and which you are now the editor of, has not only played an important role in writing about what has happened after October 7th, and of course a key role in the holding our great university presidents of leaders of our educational institutions to account in material that, were the Pulitzer Prize not a garbage dump, would have won you a Pulitzer Prize, though it did win you the Manhattan Institute Award this week, and I want to congratulate you on that. But we are in a world in which Donald Trump managed to spend 8 years being called Hitler by everybody in the mainstream media, and he has fought them and contested them, and then he decided in his own way over the last 3 or 4 months, as he had in different ways, to bypass them, right? And bypass the way in which people communicate, which campaigns have traditionally communicated people through large-scale news interviews on big media like 60 Minutes, more debates, because debates have such big audiences and all of that, and instead to go on podcasts and to talk to Joe Rogan and to talk to guys whose names I can't even remember, and all of that.
Bryson DeChambeau.
Well, Bryson DeChambeau is, of course,
his name.
Glorious, wonderful figure. Anyway, but so I wanted to ask you how you view, in the wake of the election, this absolute emotional meltdown on the part of not only pundits, but reporters and sort of analysts and all of that, to the fact that their ability to shape the conversation such that they could take out this guy who had been indicted 91 times, found liable for sexual assault, had his company taken away by the Attorney General of the state of New York, found for fraud, all of that, and ate with Nick Fuentes and had Kanye West to his house and all that, and nothing that they did could prevent him from winning the popular vote in 2024.
Well, it's really interesting because a couple of things. First, in 2016, when the press got the election wrong, there was a lot of talk about why that was, and introspection in terms of how should newsrooms change to better capture the reality of the country and present it to their readers. And what we're seeing in the wake of Trump's much more decisive victory in 2024 that occurred in part because of press coverage. There's no talk of that at all. How did we get this wrong? And if you'd been reading the major newspapers in the run up to the election, I don't think you would have had an accurate sense of who these candidates were, why they were running the sorts of campaigns they were, and what was happening in the country. But there's no talk of course correction. And in fact, I was struck by the New York Times' headline the day after the election was "Trump's America, Victory Changes Nation's Sense of Itself." And Jan Crawford of CBS News commented, "Isn't the headline Victory Reveals NYT Doesn't Understand Nation?"
The New York Times has been hilarious.
It's unbelievable.
America hires a strongman. Today's print edition is Trump's grievances became the vessel for America's rage. The Post in the Bezos exerting himself era has been a little bit better, trying to play the political news a little bit straight. But the Times, MSNBC, all of the centers of resistance media, they have not wasted a moment in self-reflection, and of just moving to, the typical response whenever Republicans have a great victory.
Yeah. My favorite was the Times had a piece yesterday about how devastated Democrats were beginning to, confront the future, and they try to parse how Democrats are reacting, and they say others turned inward, searching for why the nation rejected them. They spoke about misinformation and the struggle to communicate the party's vision in a diminished news environment, inundated with right-wing propaganda. And I just thought that's the kind of self-reflection I want to engage in, which I blame everybody else.
I have one that's my favorite that I'd like to share. A friend passed along this morning. This is in the article in the Times on what Kamala Harris might do next. So here's some different ideas. And the final idea I will just read to you because I love it so much. Practice self-care and go for a hike. About the only clue regarding Ms. Harris's post-election plans is her apparent desire to spend more time with food not eaten on a campaign plane. Quote, "I plan on putting on some pounds after this is over," Kamala Harris said on October 27th in Pennsylvania at a bookstore in Pennsylvania. Okay, maybe that's the first thing the New York Times needs to do is hire an editor. Okay, yeah. The quote continues, "They're working me to the bone." Here's the reporter. Harris could also emulate Mrs. Clinton. Days after she lost to Mr. Trump in 2016, the former Secretary of State was spotted by a fellow hiker on a trail outside her home in Chappaqua, New York. Bill Clinton took a photo that the woman subsequently shared on Facebook, where it went viral. Final paragraph. Ms. Harris still has 10 weeks left to reside in the Naval Observatory, the grounds of which are not known for good hiking. But Rock Creek Park in Washington is nearby, with miles of pretty trails for the vice president or her supporters to relieve their post-election stress on foot. Now, those two sentences are so absurd. I'm almost beginning to think now that it's a troll, like it's a purposeful troll of the Democrats. But this is what you're reading in the paper of record, that it's time for Kamala Harris to, have some of her Doritos. Remember when they told us some things we didn't know about? She loves Doritos. Have some Doritos, have some junk food, kind of let it slide for a little bit, and then just take a relaxing walk in Rock Creek Park.
I am speechless.
I am looking at you and you're speechless.
I am speechless. That
Go
is
for a walk.
fantastic. I thought that nothing could beat, for comic relief this week, the 2.5-minute video produced by the
that
New
was
York
great.
Times opinion
Of
section
the columnists.
on what's the worst you can imagine about the second Trump presidency, that featured, among other things, Michelle Goldberg with her Louise Brooks bob, explaining that what she saw as a possible future, the worst future, mind you, not necessarily, but the worst future, but a conceivable future, was a concentration camp set up in her neighborhood in Brooklyn. She says this with a straight face. Troops on the streets of Brooklyn hunting down illegal migrants. This is a columnist for the New York, by the way, an anti-Zionist columnist for the New York Times. So may her tongue cleave to the roof of her mouth in the wake of a pogrom in Amsterdam, about which I am sure she will either not write or will come up with some means to blame Bibi Netanyahu's firing of Yoav Gallant on the event.
Well, that particular columnist has a history of writing columns that say this just helps the right. This anti-Semitism just helps the right. So that is the most likely thing, is unhelpful politically to our side to beat up Jews and stab Jews in Amsterdam. Please don't do that.
Yeah. Well, by the way, there's an important element. We mentioned the question of the Jewish vote. There does seem to be, as the days pass, and I think we get more and more data, there does seem to have been a somewhat epical change. As I said in my piece on Wednesday or something, the delta in the change in Jewish support seems to be somewhere between 10 and 40% in Trump's favor. If you go by certain counties, it's very hard to do this with a community as small as the Jewish community and the country as large as this. But it does seem to be something like 10 to 40%, which is not, it's beyond the realm of the normal, except in this one election where we do these wild swings in like Latino support or black male support toward Trump. And I was thinking about this in relation to Harris and Biden, and what we would have thought would have been the case just a year ago today, a month after October 7th. Biden had gone to Israel. Israelis were deeply grateful for the support that he demonstrated by going to Israel in the wake of the war. He had pledged American support. He had said that, Hamas needed to be destroyed. He had said, I have Israel's back. And there was this sense that, Obama had no reservoir personal sympathy for Israel, but that Biden did. Biden had it. And he may have had differences with the government, but that, this was existential. And here they were, and something, and that this was a very notable moment. And then somebody had a meeting at the White House and said, we got trouble in Dearborn, Michigan. Arab Americans and Palestinians are very concerned that you're showing too much support, and Michigan's going to be very close, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that happened. And then for 11 months, we got this seesaw of the administration providing military aid and saying that Israel was killing too many Palestinians, and providing and saying Israel should not go into Rafah, building the pier because they could not trust that Israel was going to allow enough food aid in when it was allowing in 600 tons of food aid a day, or whatever the hell number it was that they were allowing in, believing every lie that was being told by the NGOs about Israel, and Jose Andres's lies, and all these lies about what Israel was doing and blowing up hospitals and all of that. And there was Trump, and Trump, the only thing that Trump said 2 or 3 times was, Israel needs to finish the job, should do it quickly because the pictures are terrible. Doesn't look good, But Israel needs to finish the job. And what's more, when it became clear, when Iran started entering the picture, then the question was, well, who do you trust to deal with Iran if Iran is going to be firing missiles at Jews? Like, do you trust the administration that reopened, that like is, gave the money and like wants to go back into the nuclear deal? Or do you trust the guy who left the nuclear deal and says, you know what, Israel should blow the hell out of Iran? And by November 5th, maybe 40%, this 100% swing maybe in the Jewish vote, when all is said and done, toward Trump happened. And it didn't have to happen. And it's an important element of understanding just how little.
There's another element here, Jeff, that you have alluded to in the past, and now it's actually come to fruition. You had sort of talked about it speculatively, which was that Biden could have tied himself to Israeli victory. And we've seen over the past months, Israel, in a very dazzling way, win and win and win and win, which has inspired a lot of people, not just Jews, but I think has brought a lot of people around to saying, this is a pretty good thing. They're actually taking out a lot of thousands and thousands of dangerous people, threats to us, threats to the world. And during that whole time, you have the Biden administration saying, stop, this is no good. Don't do this.
Right. And down. Eliana, in terms of
terrorists who had American blood on their hands for decades.
Of course. And there's
on the watch, FBI has had some of these guys on its most wanted list for a very long time.
And then Israel just Eliana, the Free Beacon exposed the behavior of the presidents of Harvard, Penn, MIT, has been going after campus stories. The Biden administration has a Department of Education. It has an education secretary. It has a president who has a megaphone. It has a vice president who has a megaphone who could have come out and said, the behavior on these campuses is unacceptable. I don't want to see these encampments. You better take them. This is not the way we do things in America. Let these students pass. Let these kids study. Don't interfere with children are our future. They need to be educated to lead 21st century America into a dazzling new future. And they sewed their mouths up.
Right. Well, we saw the same thing from the administration and then from Vice President Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, on the campaign trail, which is a reluctance and a refusal to call this by its name. And in fact, they did the opposite. They said these protesters, they have a point. Both Harris and Walz said that. But this is sort of connected to what Abe said. I actually think I was talking with people last night. Iran has a short window to retaliate now in this Biden's lame duck before Trump's inauguration, and their calculations have to be interesting. They need to act before Trump is inaugurated. He's likely to be more tough on them, but I actually think we're more likely to see Biden distance himself from Harris. We saw Biden march up and give this speech yesterday, and he looked happy as a clam that he wasn't the one. He wasn't the one who lost. He looked light as air. We put up a video at the Free Beacon and we put the Shaggy song, "It Wasn't Me," under it. So I think that based on the election,
he's having Trump to lunch. He's having the fascist to lunch.
So I think, this is just a guess, that Biden is likely to revert to being more pro-Israel based on the election results and say Harris is wrong, and he's going to throw her under the bus now. That's what I would suspect between now and January, and make it more difficult for Iran.
Wouldn't it be great if we got the Biden-Trump golf game now?
Yeah, it would be so. Oh my gosh,
so great, so great. And by the way, I'm not sure that this calculation. This goes into an entirely other conversation. We have to bring this to a close because these podcasts have been going on too long. But just judging by the 1980 model, that is to say, unexpected victory of this person who is an unknown, even though Trump's not an unknown quantity, but like Reagan beats Carter. Carter humiliates himself in relation to the Iran hostage crisis. And on Inauguration Day, Iran releases the hostages, the 52 hostages from their captivity at the U.S. Embassy after 445 days, because they wanted to clear the decks and not have this fact giving Reagan any casus belli, because they did not know what he might or might not do. And Trump said on July 27th, Trump said, they better get those speaking of the American hostages, by the way, of whom there are now 4, I believe, still in custody, maybe 6. They better
bodies, I think,
and they better get those hostages out before I am inaugurated, or there are going to be very serious consequences. And do you think Iran, which takes the prospect of a Trump presidency so seriously that it sought to assassinate him during this period, didn't hear that message?
And the currency plunged the day.
Right. Yeah, I'm just saying. I think,
and it looks
Iran
to
may
be
not
that
strike.
the Trump official leading the transition is going to be Brian Hook, right? Who was a very serious proponent of the maximum pressure strategy.
Well, implemented. He was the implementer of the maximum pressure.
So that's the first face you see guiding yourself into the Trump administration.
So maybe
you to first meet Brian Hook.
This great segue into maybe just the last piece of news that we should touch on briefly, which was Trump's decision yesterday to choose his campaign manager, Susie Wilds, as his chief of staff. I think this is a very important decision right off the bat. I've been saying on the podcast for a long time about how impressed I've been with Susie Wilds and Chris LaCivita leading the Trump campaign. Susie Wilds in particular, someone who has vast experience in American politics, worked for DeSantis, had a falling out with DeSantis, went to Trump, and has been with Trump since 2022. And clearly, she knows how to deal with Trump. Trump trusts her. She will be the first woman chief of staff in American history. But this is not a diversity pick. This is a pick based on merit. And everyone who I know who has dealt with Susie Wilds says she is data-driven, a straight shooter, and she is, I think, going to be now the center of a lot of lower-level decision-making. Of course, the big decisions will come from Trump. They always do. But she is, without a doubt, the most capable person to serve as Trump's chief of staff since 2017. And I think it's a big, big decision.
We know 3 things about this. Number one, when he came and appointed his chiefs of had that bizarre structure,
right?
His chief of
Bannon,
staff structure,
Priebus, and Kellyanne, I think.
Yeah, he knew Kellyanne because she lived in his building. Right. He met Priebus and
she was also the first female campaign manager to win. Right. I mean, Kellyanne, I think, has a good perspective on things.
Yeah,
but putting Priebus as the chief of staff was a terrible move.
He didn't know Priebus from Adam. Priebus was was a congressional staffer who then went on to run the RNC pretty incompetently in a lot of ways, and he picked him. And then there was Bannon, and there was this total chaos. And he didn't know any of them, and he didn't trust. I mean, he knew Kellyanne, as I say, socially almost. He didn't trust any of them. He had no reason to trust any of them. He then defaulted to Jared and Ivanka as basically the only people that he could make sure had his back. So he knows Wiles. He now has had 2.5 years to trust her. She worked his campaign in 2016 and in 2020
in Florida, and won Florida both times.
Right, and won Florida both times, and even, I think, more importantly, the one thing that we were told yesterday about what it was that she had said she wanted to do this was the door to the Oval Office is closed.
Right.
All we ever heard throughout the administration were that people would wander in I mean, it's almost unimaginable if you've ever actually worked in the White House, as I did, or even visited the White House, that people could wander into the Oval. It's the like most, like there was no order. It was chaos. And Sebastian Gorka could walk in and say, you better do something about thus and such. That guy on the National Security Council is not to be trusted. And suddenly gets into Trump's head and that kind of thing. And she is going to gatekeep, which is what the chief of staff is supposed to do. Say, no, you can't go in to see the president. And here is your schedule. And here is how you're going to do. Now, you don't want to follow the schedule. That's your choice. You're the president. You can do whatever you want. But other people aren't going to be masters of your time. That alone means he wants to run a more disciplined operation run by somebody he trusts, with whom he now has a long relationship that is solely political, not someone from his business life, not someone that he golfs with, not all
and
it
not
is.
Someone from DC.
And not someone from DC. So, which is, by the way, a tradition.
The Trump organization itself was a big part of staffing him. The Trump organization.
Yeah, exactly.
The White House.
Yeah, and remember, there was that whole thing where Chris Christie was designing a transition, and Jared Kushner said, "Chris Christie sent my dad to jail. He needs to go and be thrown in a garbage can."
I also think Trump really hadn't known that there was a transition going on, or that Chris Christie was in charge of it until he won in 2016. This is total different. A total difference from 8 years ago.
I also
remember he's the most experienced freshman president ever. Because he was president.
I guess Grover Cleveland.
Right, no, but I mean, there was no White House staff. When Grover Cleveland, there were like 12 people who worked in the White House when Grover Cleveland was president. Like, who knows more about how the White House works going into the White House than Donald Trump as president? No one ever in history.
It's like the movie where Rodney Dangerfield goes back to college.
On Susie, I also think it's worth noting that she unites disparate aspects of the right in terms of people's admiration and respect and good opinion of her. So you had Charlie Kirk of Turning Point coming out and saying, she's so wonderful, this is a great pick. You had Kevin McCarthy on Guy Benson's show coming out and saying, I don't want this job, Susie Wilds should do it. And you had Jeb Bush come out yesterday and say, Susie Wilds is the greatest. She's going to be a phenomenal chief of staff. And I would note, I had in the back of my mind yesterday, how Ron DeSantis must be thinking and interpreting all of this. And it just occurred to me that the fact that he couldn't keep up a relationship and keep on someone like her who did unite the disparate factions of the right said something about why he lost and why Trump won.
It was worse than that.
Yeah. I mean, no. They had a horrible explosive fallout.
Actively tried to destroy Susie Wilds' career.
Well, think about this. She works better. She works better with Donald Trump than with Ron DeSantis,
or with Casey DeSantis, which I think is actually more to the point, that Casey DeSantis didn't like Susie Wilds for I don't know, Sarah Netanyahu reasons. We don't really
just on what Seth was saying and Brian Hooks. What Wilds also just suggests is this transition that has been in process that Linda McMahon co-chairs. I think it's Howard Lutnick is the other co-chair.
Yeah,
that is the transition, because Wilds is definitely, I think, plugged in with that. And so you're going to hear a lot of stuff on social media about potential nominees and staff. Trust what you hear from the actual transition this time,
right? Because
that's what Wilds in La Vida are operating, and that was Trump is putting her in charge now. Of course, it's Trump. He will have his own views that he'll come in, but I think this was a move toward putting people in place that were pretty effective in certain quarters toward the end of the first term.
I think it's important also to note that who was the author of the "I am sorry, but you guys are not going to run Trump 2" in the form of the sidelining and trashing of Project 2025. That was Susie Wilds and Chris LaCivita, who said, we have nothing to do with this document. We are not responsible for this document. So much so that Kevin Roberts, the oleaginous head of the Heritage Foundation, who mastered the 2025 project following Inheritage's long tradition of producing a policy document to help a new Republican administration dating back to 1980 in a desperate effort to remain in the good graces of the administration, fires the guy that he hired to produce the 2025 project, offers a human sacrifice so that he could maintain his viability within the Trump system. And that means, like, this is a real FAFO situation. Like, they are not playing around. You know, it's not going to be that Omarosa from The Apprentice is going to get a senior White House advisor's job this time, or, you know, come on in, we'll find a place for you. Get a desk over there in the corner for Sebastian Gorka. Like, there are no inmates running the asylum. It's not going to be an amateur hour thing. It may be Trump is still Trump.
Which means,
what
by the
matters
way,
is who the president is, not who the chief of staff is.
the
But
fact that it's not going to be an insane asylum means that Elon Musk is going to draw a lot of fire over the next 4 years from the press. He's so far the scary lightning rod. He's the crazy connection that the media is warning us about.
well, look, the
and
X
RFK
factor,
Jr. Right?
yeah, well, the X factor is the RFK Jr. question.
Yeah, RFK and Elon are going to be there, kind of. They're going to kind of float around Trump, right? Because they're and RFK may have some role.
Well, that's
in government. I mean,
that's the question. Is RFK will be a signpost of whether or not there is going to be this kind of like team of rivals where you have, you know, lunatics over here in one corner and professionals in the other corner, and how is that going to work? We just don't know what that is going to be, or if it's going to be anything. Like, you think, yeah, he loves Bobby, he loves it, but take his hands off the oil.
Kennedy
we won't be in charge of the EPA. I can tell you that.
Whether he's a Kennedy or not, Susie Wilds will eat him alive.
Right.
That was my reaction to seeing the hiring of Susie Wilds yesterday, is that RFK is going to take what RFK is going to be given now.
Right. Anyway, we'll see that there are going to be very interesting and telling indications over the course of the next 2 months. I read very distressingly in a story in the Wall Street Journal last night that there are 4 candidates for National Security Advisor, and one of them is Elbridge Colby. Now, Elbridge Colby is called a former Defense Department official. He's he is a weird, hawkish isolationist who thinks that we should only we should focus everything on China. And I'm not opposed to that idea, but basically uses the threat of China as a means of saying that we should pull back everywhere else and focus only on China. And then a guy like him, when it comes down to it, when asked, well, does that mean that you're going to therefore support a war on behalf of Taiwan against China? Basically says, no, I'm actually, if it comes to that, we shouldn't be involved in that war either. He's a bad actor, and he would be a bad leading figure. And I probably shouldn't say that because maybe it'll help him if I attack him. But that is the first actually genuinely piece of distressing news in the great whisperers whispering, is Bridge Colby being considered for national security.
He's close to Vance, and those views are very prevalent in MAGA and America First. It's going to come down to how they relate to Trump in the interview, I think, in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And so we just don't know. So much is yet to be written. But when you think about it, the 2 bold personnel moves Donald Trump has made since July, Vance and Wiles, are very important. And Vance was definitely a confidence pick, a successor pick, but Vance's performance improved on the campaign trail to the point where I think he's gained a lot of credibility among people who were a little bit wary or skeptical of the choice. So that's not one. And the debate performance against Walz, I think was a turning point in the campaign, right?
Yeah.
So that worked out. And now Wiles, you have someone who is extremely effective as well. As you say, she is a gatekeeper, but she also knows that, look, Trump is going to be Trump, as they used to say about Reagan. And there's only so much you can do about that, and you just try to roll with the punches and convince them of your point of view. So I think these are very good decisions at the outset, and we're not going to like everything, John.
No, we're not. I'm under no illusions, but like there will be signposts of things.
Yeah.
Will he? And there are things that we're not going to understand either. Like, let's say he picks Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, which may be now more likely because of Susie Wilds' presence, because Marco.
Well, and also remember, we haven't mentioned our friend Tom Cotton has removed himself from contention, right? So now you see Cotton's not in play now. Right. And I do think there's a desire to have someone with kind of a more hawkish Jacksonian worldview in the cabinet. So is that Marco at stake?
Well, that's what we don't know. So that's what's interesting about this, because it will be a telling sign about the future of this administration and the Republican Party, which is that, of course, Rubio was the neoconservative candidate in 2016. He blew it. Didn't work out. No. He moved away. He hired Mike Needham of Heritage to be his chief of staff. He talks but he was a hawk, and he was always a hawk. So if he becomes Secretary of State, well, we don't know. He will obviously be a very articulate and interesting person, good to have on the shows, will know how to talk about foreign policy in a way that, say, Rex Tillerson only knew how to talk about the Boy Scouts in the first year of the Trump one administration. But Rubio is a kind of unknown quantity. Like, he has with the MAGA on foreign policy, but also doesn't. And
he's on foreign policy. He's still very much, I think, an advocate for freedom and democracy.
Right.
He's MAGA more on kind of common good economics, industrial policy stuff, strategic competition with China. The other name, there are a lot of names in the mix, of course. Pompeo is still kind of in the mix.
Although apparently for defense, the word that's been floated is that he's in the mix for defense. He did
you
graduate,
don't know anything until
he did graduate at the top of his class at West Point.
Yeah, so if I can just give some advice to people, if you're selecting a Republican administration and you're going to have a realist in your cabinet and a hawk in your cabinet, follow Reagan. Put the realist at defense and the hawk at the State Department, because you need to control the State Department. The State Department and the realist, that's Powell. That's Bush 43. And that doesn't work because they're captured by the state bureaucracy. But you have Schultz at the head of the State Department, and you get some really effective governance. Whereas if you have Weinberger at defense, yes, you're going to be a little bit more cautious, but that Reagan's DOD, that kicks some butt. So that's kind of, if I were telling President Trump, has never happened and probably never will. But if I were there telling him, I'd say, you want your realist at defense and your hawk at state. We'll see what happens.
That is good. The other names that are being floated for state are Senator Jim Hagerty of Tennessee.
Yes.
Yeah. Businessman.
Former ambassador to Japan. Trump likes him a lot. Yeah.
And apparently, again, sort of like very MAGA in his forced posture as a senator, being somebody who came in after in the world of Trump and not before the world of Trump. Right. But if you go and you read his website and you look at where he is on foreign policy, what he says about foreign policy, particularly about Israel, I would again, I shouldn't endorse his nomination because that would make it maybe less likely, but I would be entirely comfortable with Hagerty, somebody I'm not particularly familiar with until I spent about an hour.
I think the pro-Israel community will be well represented in the next Trump administration.
I think that is,
and I do think he has a history of having people like Robert C. O'Brien around him who are, thoughtful in wherever they come out on certain issues.
O'Brien's also in the mix for some of these.
Engaging with all the factions, and they wanted Robert C. O'Brien to run for Senate. They tried to push him to run for Senate this year, didn't they? In Utah, wherever. So these are people that the party respects across the board, and I think as long as those names are the ones you keep hearing in the mix, the Robert C. Ryan's and Marco Rubio's, you're getting a sense that there is a kind of consensus for people who at least know what they're talking about and have experience, etc.
I do think that one thing to watch for in the Great Mentioning is there is a very serious over reliance in these lists on senators, and that's not necessarily the easiest or smartest lift in terms of Machiavellian power planning, because if you pick Tommy Tuberville in Alabama to do something, not that I desperately hope he won't, but you can be reasonably assured that who replaces him is a Republican. But, you don't entirely know if you pick Eric Schmidt in Missouri. Probably that's not going to be a problem, but it's not 100% lock that Eric Schmidt is replaced by a Republican. And yes, you now have 53 seats, but you don't want to muck around with your Republican majority. And I don't think you should look for more than one, at most two senators, if that number, going into the cabinet, because that's just introducing a note of uncertainty.
I agree with that, but I will also say that Donald Trump won the state of Missouri by 19 points.
I know, but but then you could get the Carrie Lake nominee in Missouri, and I'm just saying, Eric, right. I don't care.
They like senators because they're easy to confirm. Senators are easy to confirm, so they
can be, or sometimes they make a lot of enemies, and somebody puts a.
I think there will be a lot of businessmen.
Yeah.
I think also, the two candidates in Michigan and Nevada for Senate races, Mike Rogers seems to have lost a close race against Alyssa Slotkin. Sam Brown still hasn't been called. He could lose a close race against Jackie Rosen. Both of them, I think, would be good fits for positions in the administration. Sam Brown in particular.
VA.
Yeah. I mean, so you can kind of see how this is going to come together. And of course, there's going to be, MAGA has a list of people they want, and a lot of those names are going to get in. And Maha now has a list of people it wants. And that's when the fun begins. Because, I'm open up my pantry, John, and I see all these brightly colored cereals. Not in 4 years.
Yeah, no.
It's all going to be dull.
That's right.
We're all going to be healthy
again.
I can't wait.
Right. That's right. I do, but I just want to, all I'm saying is that when they make these lists up at the Wall Street Journal and places like that, where I would trust Eliana's list, 10 times more than I would trust their list, because what do they know? They know what they're being told. They live in Washington, and everybody, therefore, you just put a name on the list because somebody told you that somewhere who lives in Washington.
No, people also want to have their names floated for having been in contention, even if they were not in contention.
Right. You can be sure that Hillary Clinton's name will be floated for Secretary of State too.
There you go.
Maybe someone close to.
Well, she'll be taking a walk in Rock Creek Park.
Hillary
Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I hope they take a walk together, and that Bill is there.
And the accidental
for the
camera.
one time that Bill and Hillary are together every 4 years.
Sometimes
Bill
you see them on the beach.
to be there and take a picture.
You see them on the beach
in the forest.
I want to hear Bill's read on the election. I mean, because as I've been saying, he's been great on the trail. Just to hear Bill Clinton's read of what he thinks happened.
Yeah, Bill Clinton Unchained. It takes him 25 years to tell the truth about what happened in Camp David.
I mean, honestly, what the record of the Democratic Party over the last decade or so, I think vindicates Clintonism, does not repudiate it, right?
That's right.
Well, Bill Clinton is not shy because, he writes 1,000-page memoirs and sits down with the historian and has those conversations, those recorded conversations to be published after, and that is 800 pages, which is White House conversation. So you end up getting, a couple thousand pages of Bill Clinton just from his time in the White House, from his mouth.
First, he has a lot to
he's
say.
Not shy. He'll say what.
And he's 78.
He said.
And he's 78, and FAFO with him too, which I think is what Matt is saying.
I'm most looking forward to Barack Obama's explaining to the American people.
Oh, well, he already has. Did you see his Twitter post?
Yes.
But that's the only start. He's going to give another speech, I'm sure. Because
we'll
need leadership in the Democratic Party now. Go vote.
I think Biden's explanation was the best, which was like,
Yeah.
it's all going to be fine.
We're okay.
It's all going to be fine. It's
I
like,
called him
you
a
know,
fascist.
everything I said for
I
the
know.
last 3 years.
4 years.
It's all going to be
We're
fine.
great. Be happy.
Thank God she didn't win. I mean,
He's so relieved.
Oh my God. You know, it sort of has this, there's, I don't know, it's more like low comedy than it is, you know, hubris taketh a fall. But there was never a moment like that moment yesterday morning.
I mean, the contrast between his speech and her speech,
I know,
was like the Grand Canyon of political rhetoric. It was amazing.
Well, it was so deserved because we were criticizing them for all these months since the summer about the fact that they're pushing Biden out because he's not all there anymore. But the reason they kept giving was, well, he's going to lose the election. And then then he gave, that address where he says, well, winning, I think I can do the job, but winning is more important than anything. And the unity of the party is more. Everybody had to say the whole thing is about winning. Biden's fine. He can serve us. Harris told us he's fine. Behind closed doors, he's fine. Okay, he's a bit sleepy at time, but he's fine. He's as good as any other president. He's leaving because he doesn't want to lose the election. Mm-hmm. And they used that as the cover to hide the fact that they'd been covering up for 3.5 years at the time, the president's having checked out, mentally, and having to sort of stage manage the presidency. It's all about who's going to win. He's stepping down to win. So if I were Biden, I would absolutely be laughing my head off right now, because even if I didn't want Trump to win, I would be saying this whole thing was constructed around one justification.
Also, what is Trump?
We did.
Also, what does Trump's victory mean? It means Biden can run again in 2028.
I hope he does. Hope he does.
Eliana Johnson, anything you want people to take a look at on the Free Beacon website at freebeacon.com?
Recommend Matt's column today on Biden's legacy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. So that is our recommends for the day.
Oh,
Matt,
my real recommends actually would be the documentary about Martha Stewart on Netflix, which is so fascinating.
Good. Oh, it is so good. It is so good.
Yeah.
She is so interesting there, because I'd watched one on CNN, which was just like a kind of like Good Housekeeping profile. It was like so fluffy and insubstantial. And here they show her yelling at people and yelling at people in her kitchen and talking about how her boyfriend tells her in bed that he's going to marry somebody else while they're lying in bed together after she comes out of jail, and that he can never speak to her again because his new mother-in-law doesn't like her. I mean, that is some rich, rich stuff. Yeah, that's R.J. Cutler's documentary about Martha Stewart. An excellent choice. All right. Have a good weekend, everybody. We'll be back on Monday for Abe, Seth, Matt, and thank you again, Eliana. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.